Thank you very much. We're here to talk about, does Olympic fever or getting excited about the Olympics impact youth participation? Does it get more kids on the soccer pitch, on the courts, and in pools? And the answer is yes. So my presentation is fini at this point. What I'm here to talk about actually today is a little bit more of the trends that are going on in youth sports, some of the challenges. So if you're looking for a speaker who is best done after wine at lunch, who has all the answers to solving the problems with youth participation, you will be sorely disappointed. Because I'm actually looking for answers as much as providing them here of what's going on in youth sports and how big events such as the Olympics and the World Cup impact youth participation and what we've learned at USA Swimming. So first of all, just having some absolute dumb luck is always really helpful. First of all, being the chief marketing officer during the period that Michael Phelps is swimming, that's my first tip. The second is on the right is a very young Katie Ledecky, and is just a phenomenal distance swimmer. So having a little bit of luck of having those Olympians inspire the next generation of Olympians is always a great thing. But when we think about the Olympics or the World Cup or other major events and inspiring youth participation, at least people of a certain age, this is what we think about. This is how we see it happening. The family gets together, they watch television in their living room and get excited. But what if it's more like this, actually? What if this is more what's happening in terms of today's youth? And I'm not here to be the curmudgeon old man who is against digital, because I'm very much in favor of it, but the game has changed for us as marketers and as federations in how to inspire kids to get involved in sports. So first, a little bit about USA Swimming. We're based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. We're an organization with about 400,000 members, 3,000 swim teams across the USA. There are plenty more fitness swimmers and other swimmers in the United States, but there are about 400,000 that are a part of USA Swimming. As an organization, we're built on three primary principles: build, promote, and achieve. And we show that in the form of a triangle, and they're equal in importance of how we treat our strategy as an organization. Build is about getting kids involved in the sport, making those swim teams better in the pool and better businesses. Promote is really what I do and wake up thinking about on a daily basis. This happens to be an image of our U.S. Olympic trials that selects our Olympic team. This happens to be from the team that the event that selected the team for Rio. But that's where you'll find our broadcast partnerships, digital partnerships, communications, PR, social media. And then achieve. The third leg of the triangle is, as Monir from the U.S. Olympic Committee talked about earlier this morning, we want to do well on the international stage. And fortunately, USA Swimming has been the #1 swimming country in the world for the last several decades. And it's a spot that we hope to keep and plan to keep, but achieving on the international stage is something that's very important to us. anyone who works in sports is always selling, and so I'm always selling. So let's get to the results of what happened in Rio, but I want to spend more time on trends that we're seeing in the United States in youth sports and what the future looks like. But really, just as a quick, to really set a baseline, USA Swimming after Athens saw a 7% increase in youth participation, early years of Michael Phelps. Beijing, as a marketer, had a lot of help. I will readily admit it and just own that. But after Beijing, we saw what was then our highest youth participation rate in history, as 11%. Now, what's interesting, just as a little bit of perspective, in Athens, to our 7%, USA Gymnastics went up about 5%. And then in Beijing, our 11%, and then USA Gymnastics at that point was actually flat, in fact, down a little bit, which was completely hard to explain, because so much of USA Gymnastics and excitement about young girls getting involved in the sport is driven by the all-around champion for that year, and Nastia Liukin won in '08. Maybe Michael Phelps blotted the sun of attention from everybody else, and gymnastics actually had a down year that year. Then London, the first ending of the Michael Phelps era, USA Swimming's participation went up about 13%. Now, again, just as a comparison for gymnastics, who, of course, we compete with for attention and participation in the sport, actually blew us away. Gabby Douglas won the all-around that year, and USA Gymnastics participation went up by about 20% that particular year. So we'll get to Rio here in a little bit. But really just look at what's changed in society since London. Yes, some of these things existed, but we've heard presentations this morning about esports. There's maybe a little bit of discussion about competition for other events, Tough Mudder. Just the nature of media consumption has changed with over-the-top networks like Netflix or Hulu. But now, as you know, individual sports organizations are creating their own over-the-top networks, and that's proliferating across international properties as well as U.S. properties. But if you just look at the nature of change of what's happened even since London, and now NBC was maybe even criticized a little bit for TV viewership going down in Rio, but that really, in my opinion, wasn't a fair criticism, because consumption across all digital channels was still up. But the nature has changed, and that's impacting us in the youth sports business in a big way. So really, like most things in business, sports business, you follow the dollars. And at least according to the Sports Business Journal and Sports Illustrated, youth sports, 38 million kids in the U.S. alone, $14 billion industry, and you start wondering, with the sports that are at the absolute peak of, for us in the U.S., NFL, Major League Baseball, internationally, the EPL, why there's so much attention and focus there. However, you're starting to see a major movement into youth sports because it's such a developing and growing business. So, trends in youth sports. These are some major things that I'm seeing, at least from our seat at USA Swimming, that are impacting what happens with youth participation. First of all, you're seeing sports make major adaptations to get more people to play. Golf, moving to a bigger holes to speed up play, shortening the holes, telling people to play 9 holes instead of 18. Imagine taking your sport and telling people to play it less in order to grow the sport. Tennis, using a bigger ball, a bigger racket, smaller court. Tennis has looked at this and said, why are we teaching kids to play with the same racket, same ball, same court that Serena Williams and Roger Federer are playing on? Now, this is blasphemy in some of these sports. It's a complete disrespect in many of these sports, in some of their opinion, but they're making major changes to try to adapt to today's culture. For swimming, this is blasphemy. I still get in trouble for this program. We created a program called Swim Jitsu, and it's an obstacle course. It was taking a little bit of inspiration from the NFL's punt, pass, and kick, and a little bit of inspiration from American Ninja Warrior in creating a swimming program. People still hate this program within my office, but we're trying new things to try to introduce people to the sport in a new and different way. They'll find out soon enough that swimming is hard and looking at the black line is hard, but we have to introduce and be thinking differently about how we introduce kids and families to the sport. This is the one that absolutely keeps me up at night. You're talking about USA Swimming, which is a relatively large Olympic federation in the United States, but a blip on the radar in terms of the powerful resources behind some of the major sports leagues. And they're all investing. The NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, even USA Hockey and the NHL are investing in youth programs. So if you're in my seat, you're quite worried about that because we don't have that financial deep pocket to really keep up with this. So we have to be more creative. And I say that and somewhat represent swimming, gymnastics, athletics. All of the sports across the Olympic spectrum have to be more creative going forward because we're about to enter an arms race that we cannot win, at least not financially. This is one of the most interesting trends in the United States, is more and more major companies, and in fact major media companies, investing in youth sports. And you're starting to see this across a lot of areas. NBC, which most of you are familiar with for their sports, sports coverage, bought a company called Sports Engine, based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. They do athlete registration for swimming, lacrosse, soccer. Sports Illustrated created another division called SI Play. Dick's Sporting Goods, the major sporting goods retailer, creating registration. And then one I'm curious how many people have actually heard of over on the far left of your screen, Blue Star Sports, is a company that's owned by the NFL's Dallas Cowboys, creating a registration system to get into youth sports. There's a major movement, especially in the U.S., to get into some of that $14 billion of registration dollars. And it's a major trend impacting how kids get into sports, and as well as registration, sign up for volunteer hours, etc. This is also considered the absolute least sexy slide I will present. But it's a major shift of what's happening in United States youth sports. Is you're seeing organizations that have been around for decades, like USA Swimming, USA Diving, USA Track and Field, are actually finding competitors coming in who are offering swim teams lower insurance to cover their swimmers. Now, that's not a real high-profile, sexy item, but as a business, that's very serious to us and creates a real competition. Imagine us being the taxi industry for so many, many decades, thinking we had no competition whatsoever, and then along comes Uber and Lyft. And we're experiencing this trend in the United States right now of people coming in for as simple and what I would say as maybe even boring as lower insurance being a real competitive arena that we haven't really had to face before in the past. So let's get to the results of what happened in Rio and where I think it needs to go for the future. So if we look at this and go, what happened in Rio? Well, no, not that. So if you don't remember that image, just Google it. Rio, our participation went up 5.5%. Now, if you remember the earlier slides, we went up 7 one year, 11 one year, 13% in another. And you probably fully expected me to sit here and have just this growth of what's happening with youth participation over time. That didn't happen for Rio. And the real reasons that we're trying to figure out are why. And I do think there's a little bit of merit to some bad publicity that USA Swimming received after the end of the games, maybe a little bit. But I think it's more about U.S. consumption habits, how families, and in our case particularly mothers drive the decision on youth participation in the United States, at least with swimming. Maybe with American football and some other sports, it's a little more dad-driven. But for us, it's very much driven by the mother. But they're also looking at the experience they can have. My youngest daughter, who joined me here today, plays soccer. It's or football, pardon me. Try not to get in trouble with the European audience. It's an hour-and-a-half game. I can make a movie after that and know how long that game is going to last, but yet you go to a swim meet, you go to a track meet, you go to a gymnastics meet, it might be 4 hours, and God forbid if you have 2 kids, it'll be 8 hours because, of course, they're not in the same session. But that experience is just as important to the parents, and in particularly mom, of how they're making decisions of getting their kids into sports. So we've started to have to cater to what is the experience like for the child as well as the parent in terms of getting involved in sports. And it's a challenge that we just haven't traditionally seen in the last few decades. So, the vision for the future of where we want to go. I'm going to casually walk over here and make it look as if I'm casual, but I'm really just looking at the time. So our vision for the future, where we need to go, is I've got a few tips and suggestions of what we need to think about, especially as Olympic sports organization. And for us, again, to compete with those NFLs, the NBAs of the world, we have to collaborate as an industry. We're 4 years, USA Swimming is 4 years into an industry collaboration to drive participation in the sport. We asked Arena, Speedo, and Tier to get in the same room together and get along with each other, to form one campaign to drive youth participation. We're only 4 years into that, but we're seeing searches for swim teams go up, and we're holding our ground. But for organizations that don't have a ton of resources, we do have to be more creative in how we're driving participation. This is a major one. It's not major yet, but if those familiar with the U.S. broadcast, NBC of the Olympics, NBC created a program called Gold Map, and it was really simple. And while you were watching coverage of swimming, there's a promotion that came on with it, a voiceover from the announcers, and said, hey, if you want to drive, you want to try swimming, you're excited about the Olympics, and you want to join a swim team in your area, go to NBCOlympics.com/goldmap. And they did the same. They did the same with other sports across the spectrum. Started in Sochi with the Winter Olympics in a much smaller way. Now, what that happened with us, with USA Swimming, is that drove about 73,000 visitors to search for a swim team. Okay, not overwhelming, right, in terms of numbers. Gymnastics drove about 113,000, and U.S. Volleyball was about 40,000. But I think the point is once they got to our site, 57% of those people converted to search for a swim team. So the model is right. Even if the numbers are not off the charts yet, the model is right that the broadcaster can have a significant influence in the grassroots of the sport and growing youth participation. And if they don't do it, they know that they're not going to have whatever tablet or whatever device somewhere down the road. If they don't drive it, they know that they're not going to actually have viewers of the future. So a major trend that the broadcasters can really have an influence on driving participation. This is the one where, quite candidly, I'm still looking for ideas as much as anything. But if the broadcaster can have that much influence, and if people are on their phones and devices, there has to be a way that through geo-targeting, targeted promotions, understanding user behavior, that the Googles or the Samsungs or even the Apples of the world can help us as an industry grow youth fitness, grow participation. I wish I was an entrepreneur that had my finger on what the exact idea is right now. But the vision of this is very big in my mind of how we solve this and how we get the companies, both the broadcasters and technology companies, involved. But I know this needs to happen if only I could just figure it out. And second is this is a huge thing for both the U.S. and for France. However this plays out, I do think it's a huge opportunity for growing youth participation. And when the U.S. last hosted the Summer Olympics in 1996 in Atlanta, swimmers were coming to pools without us doing anything, and we were complacent. We didn't need to do anything. but really both the 2024 and 2028 Olympic Games and Paralympic Games give us an incredible opportunity to think about driving youth participation more than ever. I think London did a very good job at it. They're early in the process, but that legacy of participation is a huge piece that needs to continue, and I think London, a tip of the hat to London for really, at least in my opinion, starting that in a successful way. At the end of the day, we have to look at this differently as a sport, and we have to look at it from a different angle. And Jean-Francois Martin, who opened the session this morning, had a brilliant quote, and I may not get it exactly right, but we're here to invent the future of the sport. And so I hope whether you're in the technology industry or sports industry or Olympic industry, that we can all invent the future of the sport together. Thank you.